Okay, welcome to the workshop on Sweden and Swedish imperialism. Well, I will say a few things more about that later. First of all, we are very happy to welcome Aris Patris, who is Aris is responsible for ideology and studies in the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Sweden. For those of you who don't know, the Communist Party of Sweden is the historical Communist Party of Sweden. And it is also a member of the Secretariat of the European Initiative of Communist and Workers' Parties. Yeah, so most of you have probably already listened to Comrade Andreas Sørensen, the chairman of the party, who participated in our plenary discussion yesterday on imperialism. So I think I don't have to explain too much about the general position of the SKP on imperialism. To put it briefly, the SKP rejects the notion that imperialism is a quality of only a few selected countries at the top of the world hierarchy. Instead, it views imperialism as a social relation, as the highest stage of capitalism, which is why the SKP also does not use imperialist as a description for one or the other country, but rather as a term to describe the world system as a whole. You can correct me, of course, if I say something wrong. Yes, so now today's seminar will be about the history of Swedish imperialism, of the role of Sweden within the imperialist system, the plans for Sweden joining imperialist alliances, and finally also the special role of social democracy and the so-called Swedish welfare model for Swedish capitalism and the rule of the bourgeoisie in Sweden. I think this is probably already enough from my side, because I don't want to steal the time of Comrade Aris. So thank you for being here, and we are all very excited to hear what you have to say.
Okay, yes, thank you for, it's nice to be here and to be able to speak about this topic. Right, so when I told the KO what I was going to talk about, I was I hadn't been finished with the presentation. So it's not exactly what you told, but we were in the middle of our election campaign for the parliament, for the Swedish parliament, so we didn't have so much time back then. But later we changed it a bit, so I can describe the schedule for this presentation. So first I'm going to speak about the Swedish model and the so-called non-alignment policy or neutrality of the Swedish state. And then we're going to have a Leninist analysis and try to debunk these myths about the Swedish neutrality and about the Swedish model, or also known as Nordic model. And then I think it's a kind of a long time to talk all the time, so we have a small break, 5 minutes, if it's all right for you. And then finally, we're going to talk about the non-alignment movement today and the role of the communists vis-à-vis what we see as an opportunist way of see it. Firstly, I'd like to hear what you think about the German public opinion about Sweden. Not maybe yours personal, but the general public. What do they think about when they hear about Sweden? I'm genuinely interested in that, because I know in other countries how they view Sweden. But if you want, you can talk to those around you. 2 minutes, and then you can tell me afterwards.
Unfortunately, at this point the recording was interrupted for about 10 minutes. We apologize and hope that the presentation remains understandable anyway.
So we had also a state repression of the SKP. So we say this liberal Sweden and all these things. It was a ban on newspaper. So it was a ban on distributing communist newspaper. And this is a law passed against SKP, explicitly passed against SKP inside of the parliament. This is all during social democratic rule. They had raids and imprisonment of SKP leadership. A lot of whole leadership got imprisoned. And of course, these registers that led to work camps for communists. So during the war, the communists got to special places inside of Sweden for military duty, with no weapons, in remote places, isolated from the public, and also it has been discussed scholars have discussed what the meaning of it was. So they say maybe they wanted to isolate them from the public, so not to spread anti-German propaganda. Maybe they wanted to have them easily bound together so they can give them to the Germans when they come, and yeah, not make what I believe, or what we believe as a party. The main reason is like when you can get communists out of out of the way, you do that because they are getting all the problems in the production, in the strikes, and of course in the general public. We can say also that it was only the communist newspapers that got banned. Some, like when they're talking about this in schools now, they never mention anything about that, but they say now they have started to say that some liberal newspapers got their upplaga. Is it the same in German? So this day's newspaper, this day's and yesterday's newspaper was taken back by the government because it said something against Nazi Germany. So that was some liberal newspapers, you know, now and then. Censorship, yes, censorship, but they were never banned completely. But the communist newspaper did. So all these places are documented places with work camps for communists, and there were a lot more. So they burned all the paper, all the documentation, so we don't know everything, and that's the bourgeoisie scholars that say that we don't know everything. It's commonly known that there were more than these. Also, there were concentration camps in Sweden, and this is a very a topic that is it's not everyone agrees with this, but there were 4,000 foreign communists in Sweden that were put in camps, and they were not because of what they did, but because of who they were, and they were no trial, and they were on a time that is not decided how long time you will be there. So this is actually the three definitions of what the concentration camp is according to United Nations. So you could call these concentration camps, and it was under the National Board of Health and Welfare of the Social Democratic Minister Gustav Müller. And this is not something that they want to talk so much about. So let's take a 5-minute break so we can go to the toilet. All right, so I hope you all understand what the Swedish model is about now. And what we need to understand is what the Swedish model provided for the monopolies. So one thing for me when I travel around Europe is that I see all the time, wherever I come, I see that Sweden is kind of 10 years ahead all the time when it comes to digitalization, when it comes to, you know, easy payments, easy transactions. Everything is so much modern in Sweden than it is in much stronger countries. If you see to absolute power, you see that Sweden is a highly, highly developed country, capitalist country. And this is also, if you compare to like Denmark or other countries in North, Finland, maybe Norway is on the same level. So the Swedish model has led to Sweden being, in comparison with most other countries, highly developed regarding the degree of concentration of capital. This can be noticed in the effective management of the Swedish state, both the politically independent authorities, like I think maybe you have in Germany as well, right? So you have authorities that are kind of independent. They don't change with the political government, right? Like in Sweden, everybody listens to them, and they are like the authorities. For instance, during COVID crisis, everyone listens to them, and the political parties have nothing to say, right? That's what we mean by independent. And then also we have the political parties in the parliament, also in accordance with the needs of the big corporations all the time. The latter is made in such an elaborated way that makes it impossible to distinguish the state from the monopolies. So we can try to summarize what the Swedish model provided to the monopolies and why it was so good for them. So you had this stability in production. Of course, you were combating communist strikes very effective. So after 1945, we kind of have no strikes in Sweden. So we went from being the most with high strike density to the country with the lowest strike density. It's almost impossible, due to all these things I explained of the Swedish model, to strike in Sweden. We have stability in finance. So you have the possibility to control real wages very effectively, because you have these years agreements with peace. You're bound to peace during these agreements. You cannot. You have 3 years. The capitalists know exactly what the real wages are, and they can also count on the profits, and it makes it stability in their finances. Is very important. And also stability in power, of course. The parties don't take any hits for the political for the policies being put forward, because the hits, like it's not the Social Democratic Party that decides something, it's the unions. So the party doesn't have to take unpopular reforms. And it is the possibility of making big changes in a smooth way. When I say big reforms, like we saw in Sweden during the 30s and especially after World War II, I know it was the same in all of Europe, but it went on in a very smooth way in Sweden, and sometimes even with the working class appearing as the initiators of these reforms, due to the state in Sweden being the same as the working class movement. And this, I've written here, capitalism still as a progressive power. This, we can have a lecture on this by itself. This is a very important issue that maybe is worthy of this kind of Congress by itself. So how much did actually the proto-Euro-communist parties, or the communist parties, reformed communist parties during this era, actually had to do with the changes in, building houses, homes for the people, building kindergartens and all these things, the social democratic reforms after the Second World War. How much was it actually something to do with class struggle, or was it maybe more the needs of capitalism to take, like in Sweden, you had all these farmers that needed to be transported into the big cities, and you had to grow the state apparatus and have all these things you needed hospitals for the workers so they can go back to production and all these things. Of course, on the marginal, the communists managed to do some things. Like the capitalists never needed the Swedish working class to go to school and study German, for example, or arts and these things. So of course you can win things, but I mean the big reforms, it was not I don't need to say so much about this because we don't have so much time. But the Swedish model was very good for making these big reforms. So the concentration of Swedish capital, this is it's hard to see, but hard to believe maybe, but it's 15 conglomerates of families that own 70% of the Stockholm Stock Exchange. And we know them. We can say the names of them, and we know what they own. Maybe you know some of these. It's international known. So, for example, all media in Sweden, all media, 95% of media. And when I say media, I mean cinema. I mean distribution of publishers. So one person owns 100 publishers. In their turn, they own all other publishers, all newspapers, all radio channels, all TV channels, phone cards, distribution chains. Everything is controlled by 3 families. So the same family that has the Social Democratic newspaper also owns the Christian Democrat newspaper. And so it's the same company. That owns everything, from every radio channel to all things are 3. And these are some of the families, or this is all the families, and they together control as much as this family, Wallenberg family, of course, the biggest hero of the social democracy in Sweden. They have a JAS, Gripen with Saab and all these things. We can see the concentration to take them as an example. So the 6th generation of Wallenberg today, yes, we have these happy kids. So I just, maybe you know some of these companies. This is just some of the companies that they own.
But he was a leader of social democracy.
He was not the leader of social democracy,
okay.
But he was a very good friend, like we see here with the prime minister. They're handling the deals with Saudi Arabia to sell Wallenberg's planes, JAS Gripen, to Saudi Arabia. So we have a lot of companies that are international, big. You know, they own biggest portion of Nasdaq in United States. Saab, of course. Banks, Q-Lager. What's Q-Lager? You know, the small balls inside of wheels that are turning. Yes, it's the big factories in Netherlands and this Svenska Q-Lagerfabriken. Schools, universities, banks, everything, you know. And with these companies, they own like hundreds of more companies. So it's the capital concentration. This is just to illustrate how big the capital concentration is in Sweden. And of course, we know during time, capital concentrations increases. And in Sweden, this has come to a very high level of concentration. So now we see, so like until now, I've described how good this model has been for capitalism in Sweden. So the Swedish model, which have worked very well for the monopolies historically until now, have lost its appeal. The communist movement has long been crumbling. The big reforms that was needed to reshape the agrarian Swedes into laborers is fulfilled. So the big portion of the capitalist mercenaries are weathering blood and is ready to exchange a part of the stability derived from the former policies for larger returns in the short term. Something that, of course, is driven by the harsh competition inside the imperialist system. And this is the very important thing to understand. And that's, maybe some of you have read our analysis of imperialism. So this is the way we need to apply and to understand imperialism. We need to use it as why, like we can understand that social democracy cannot come back, right? It was an historically event, like it was needs of capitalism during this time. Today we have competition, like what they produce in Sweden, highly technology developed country, they can produce easily in India, right? We cannot have this system anymore. It's pushed away of imperialism. Imperialism pushes it away. We cannot have this kind of, capitalism cannot afford to have this strategy anymore. So we have the dismantling of this Swedish model. So we see now they actually passed the law that they tried to pass through the Swedish model, but they couldn't. So the left party, together with the Social Democrats, the left party, of course, critical, but they vote for the government. So they passed these laws against security. You can fire workers however you want and all these things. It was 2 years ago they passed this law, and making the working atmosphere, working insurances. So like they take them away, right? Because you cannot have them. You cannot produce in Sweden 3 times the cost like they produce in China, Russia, or Brazil, or everywhere else. So you need to push the wages down. You need to make everything more, the surplus value being, you cannot use that to, you have to increase the surplus value, of course. So also in this strategy is joining NATO. So let's see about this non-alignment policy and the Swedish neutrality in history. So I will not bring you back to 1821 when they say that this neutrality is from. We don't need that. We can just see a couple of things. So this is, of course, a big lie, right? It has been an important and integral part of the administrational model alongside the so-called Swedish model of labor peace. And it has contributed to the view of Sweden as a mixed state in between socialism and capitalism, in the economy and in the foreign policy. In reality, the non-alignment, of course, has been a huge lie. So you can go travel wherever and you find Olof Palme Square or Olof Palme Street or something like that. So it's everyone thinks of it as something very noble and fine and all these things. So we know already from the World War I that Swedish took a stand on the side of Germany. Of course, that's one why it was so much social unrest. It was because they sold all wheat. They hadn't bread in Sweden because they sold it to German soldiers. They exported it to Germany. In Spain, so the social democratic government passed a law forbidding anyone to join the resistance to fighting in the international brigades. Of course, the communists went. 500 communists from the Swedish Communist Party went, but they took the sides, of course, of the fascists. And during Second World War, they was obviously on the Nazis' side. Against the Soviet Union. Not only did they only export their precious iron and woods to Germany, they also, of course, let German soldiers pass through Sweden. And we know, it's very known, all the capitalists in Sweden, how they was in favor of the Nazis and also the king and all this. And in modern times, we have NATO. So joint cooperation with NATO, so in agreements and also in joint military exercises, sending military to Afghanistan, to Kosovo, to Mali, supporting the intervention in Libya with airplanes. But they were not shooting, right? They were spotting where the Americans should shoot. So that's the neutrality of Sweden. So we know, of course, it never existed. But what we also know existed was this precious conception that worked so well for capitalism in Sweden, that Sweden is this mixed economy. Sweden is this neutral country. It was important, together with the Swedish model, to push this labor peace. So why do they want to abandon this policy now? It's, of course, also imperialism drives it this way. It's more lucrative. It's better for them to be in NATO. So in the harsh imperialist competition, for the monopolies need to reallocate state spendings from unproductive sectors, such as provided healthcare or education, to the military. The strategy supported directly or indirectly by all parties in the parliament is to make Sweden a NATO member, something that have been sought after for a long period, but not been possible to achieve due to public opinion. The Russian invasion of Ukraine presented itself as a perfect reason to finally push the agenda of NATO membership. The full membership is beneficial. Like when I say full membership, Sweden practically is a member of NATO, but they are not full they don't have full membership. So the full membership is beneficial for the monopolies for several reasons. Primarily, it allows the Swedish imperialism to increase its participation in the division of the world markets, where war is just a violent continuation of standard politics. They have already announced that in joining NATO, they will have permanent troops in the Baltic countries. Which is a market controlled already by Swedish monopolies. So they, of course, need to be able to protect these very big capital investments they have. So they control actually all these countries, Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And we can see like German capital export in these countries are very low in comparison to Swedish. So they have been let to, you know, trade off, like you send troops here, you do this, and we take this part, you take this part. So they have already announced that when we join NATO, we are going to send troops there. Of course, not to stabilize our investments, but to counter Russian troops. Also, big construction companies have been promised a significant role in the eventual build-up of Ukrainian infrastructure. And they publicly announced this, and that's a very good thing. And it's to help the Ukrainian people, of course, that the Swedish companies get these huge contracts. Equally important is the feeding of the Swedish arms industry, with huge direct links to the monopoly families, as we saw in Wallenberg and Saab. As the state spendings on military upgrades go straight to their pockets, as well as a free promotion of their weapons in new markets. Of course, it is easier to sell weapons inside NATO than from a position outside of NATO. So, I mean, it's obvious what the capitalist earns with joining NATO. So the last section and the shortest section, I know I have just talked and you have not been so involved. So it's good for us to have a longer discussion. So there is no significant movement against NATO in Sweden. The public opinion was always against joining NATO and keep up the false understanding of Sweden as a neutral state. But now they are afraid of Russia and everything have changed. So almost everyone is for joining NATO. Joining NATO is in the interest of the Swedish monopolies. The Swedish monopolies are for sure no one's puppets. They are not controlled by America. They are not controlled by Brussels. They are not controlled by Germany or any other capitalist country. They are acting in the interest of their own profits, obviously. So Marx and Lenin was, of course, right. This is how capital concentration and distribution of power works. So what we can see in Sweden, and I think we can see it in the most countries of the world, because we see it from the 50s, from the 60s, from the 70s, it's the same arguments. The opportunists express the old strategy of the capitalists, which have worked very well for them historically until now, to take the power back. They say, we need to take the power back from Brussels. That's why we need to leave the European Union. We are going to be the puppets of the United States if we join NATO. So what do we as communists say? So we want also, of course, out of NATO. We want out of the European Union and every other temporary imperialist alliance, but not because we want a false non-alignment policy to be kept. Not because we want the power back from Brussels. We as a people never had that power. The power is in the hand of the capitalist that owns all these companies, and also it's their state, right? So the capitalists have the power, but we want to fight NATO and EU because these are imperialist alliances. That is tools for the capitalists in our country and in other countries to be used to their own benefits, not the benefits of Americans only or Germans only or someone else only. We as Swedes are not occupied by foreign power. Our lives are occupied by the capitalists in our country. So that's our stance in this, and it's a very big difference between what we say and they're saying to us, come join a front against NATO and all these things, but why are we going to do that? So we're not going to join a false perception of going back to the same as it is today. So we need to push, we as communists, if we as communists doesn't do it, who's going to talk about another, that we don't need this system. That we need another system that is for the people, that is to produce things that we need, not by profit, and all these things. That's why we need a communist party, and it's only with this. If we talk to people in this way, that they will be on our sides in all fights, not only in this fight. Yeah. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. Yeah, we wanted to structure the discussion to 3 parts: Sweden, imperialism, and war in the Ukraine. But with the 45 minutes, I think we are not getting to all of these points. Because of this one suggestion, we now have time for 15 minutes questions to Sweden and to the report. And then we discuss maybe more to the role of Sweden and the NATO, to the relation of Germany, Sweden, NATO, Russia, maybe. Yeah. Okay. So, first questions.
So, dann frage ich mal auf Deutsch, dann kannst du ja übersetzen. Ich würde noch mal gerne was zu den Konsequenzen hören, wenn man diese Vereinbarung zwischen den Gewerkschaften und den Kapitalisten brechen sollte. Weil es wurde gesagt, es ist kein Gesetz, sondern eine Vereinbarung. Und also 3 Jahre zum Beispiel wird irgendwas festgelegt und in der Zeit ist Frieden abgemacht. Aber es ist ja kein Gesetz, das wurde ja gesagt. Und ich würde gerne wissen, welche Konsequenzen man haben sollte. Sollte zum Beispiel die Kommunistische Partei trotzdem einen Streik organisieren? Verliert man dann seinen Arbeitsplatz oder wie sieht das dann weiter aus?
Vielleicht sammeln wir noch. Macht immer das Mikro aus, wenn ihr genau es weitergebt, damit es nicht so stört.
You mentioned Sweden's new strategy. Can you elaborate why Sweden needs to have NATO membership now, but why they were not part of NATO in the 20th century? I didn't get that part.
I want to ask maybe a bit a question of the Communist Party. Do you have a history of opportunism inside the party, and how did you handle it? How did you handle the opportunists?
Okay, maybe you want to answer now? Or more questions? Yeah.
Okay, I think I've translated one of the questions. So he asked about this agreement between the unions and the capitalists that you mentioned, and his question is, what would the consequences have been in case, for example, the Communist Party organized a strike? So what would happen then? Because you said it was not a law, but were there any consequences to be feared if you did that?
Yes, you can lose your job and you can get fines, but you cannot be put in prison. So basically, it's that. So if you organize a strike, it's a wild strike. It's called a wild strike, and sometimes you can do that without having any consequences. It depends on how strong the strike is and what they fear will happen if they punish you. Yeah, and then we had the second question. It was about the new strategy. It was right. So this one, right? So the question is about why they want to abandon the last. So it's very expensive to uphold such a system. It's not so effective to uphold such a system with having a welfare state and all these things, and having to all the time have this. So if you want to cut if you have problems with they have too many breaks, for example, during their work, so it's not so effective to do that inside the labor movement, because you have to wait 3 years and then have the agreement again, and it's much more easier, of course, to pass a law and say it's forbidden. But that makes people angry, right? So you have to trade off the belief in the state that every Swede have. They have a deep, deep belief in the state as something good for the workers. You trade that off because you cannot do otherwise, because it's too expensive. You have to compete in imperialism, in the imperialist system, with all the other countries, which have much more effective production. So what you do is you raising the surplus value by losing some of the belief in the state. So of course it's a high game they play, but because if you cut this model, then you cut also the you boil water and you push the yes, you push it down, it will boil over, right? But if you have this ventil, is the same in German? Yes, it goes out and it can boil all the time, right? The ventil is the Swedish model, but the imperialist system makes you have to leave that. You have to take every margin and put back in capitalist accumulation, because you compete with others. If you don't do that, you lose the shares of the markets to Russians, to Norwegians, to Germans, to anyone. Right, so we can also see that it's a long discussion, but we can also see that like during socialism, so real socialism, when it existed socialist countries, and you had this all colonial countries that got independent and all these things, you had actually maybe 1/3 or even more of the world outside of the capitalist system, or outside of the direct control of imperialists, and since then they had a long time to take over these parts again, one by one. You know, all the wars in Syria, Libya, everywhere. But it's ended, right? So you cannot get these extra profits so easily, and you need to get them from everywhere in the competition. So you cannot afford to spend money on security. It's a very easy way to put it, but I hope you understand what we mean with that. And the third question was about the history of opportunism in SKP. So
I think his question was about why Sweden was not a NATO member before.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. So as we see it, it's a part of that conception that Sweden is neutral, but it was never neutral. But for the outside people and for the Swedes, they think that they are neutral, and they think that we're a mixed economy. It's socialism and capitalism together, and we're not intervening in other countries. It was a very important part of that conception. And also the public opinion were against, of course, because of that conception of what Sweden is, what Sweden thinks that Sweden is, and what the rest of the world think of Sweden. So it was they were not able to do it, so they did it actually. So everything was joined with NATO, but like it's not NATO full membership, right? So now it was a perfect way to do that because of the war in Ukraine. So because everyone is afraid of the Russians in Sweden since a long time before. So it was wars with Russia. It's not because of socialism only. It was wars with Russia during long period. Yeah, was it the answer? Yeah, and then it was about opportunism in the Swedish Communist Party. So our party, like, you mean now or you mean historically? Both. So historically, of course, the Swedish Communist Party, as a part of the Communist International, one of the founding parts of the Communist International, never had actually own independent role, we would say, of studying our history. So it was always changing opinions with the different eras of the Communist International. So we can say during the first period it was very revolutionary. During the second period it was not. During the third it was, and then it was not. So it's the same as the history of the Communist International. And we cannot find any evidence of such big discussions having been held in Sweden. And that is also a big topic, right? Because of course we can trace the opportunism back, and we can trace it even more back, and we can trace it even more back. So what was the decisive? When was the decisive moment when it appeared, you cannot find it, because it's more or less the same thing that they discussed in the 50s. Is essentially what Lenin discussed in What is to be Done Against the Economists. Is essentially the same as Marx was criticizing in the Gotha program, in Social Democratic program of Social Democratic Party of Germany. So you can see it all the way back. And also, of course, we need to understand that when the Bolshevik Revolution, the October Revolution, took place, that was the only alternative that was presented to the social democratic parties against the reformism and the war. So all parties that joined this had not by themselves come to that conclusion. They were not like we have had long discussions and we have taken the experience from that and come to this conclusion. So a lot of the parties that were in the Communist International, it was like the Swedish Communist Party was a lot of different tendencies and different thinking inside, and they was in the Communist International, and it was a very heterogeneous group, and it was not mature, and the Swedish Communist Party was not mature. Capitalism hadn't existed for a long time in Sweden. So how we dealt with that problem for ourselves now, it was actually because of the Swedish Communist Party being so small, and so like it was almost not existing for like 10 years ago. So there was no opposition. So they were only happy to see young people coming into the party. Okay, you say this, it's all right, because we need to understand that growing up inside a communist movement in the 50s and 60s means that you have a lot of conceptions of what it is to be a communist, right? And that is Marxist-Leninism. It's what the Communist Party of France said in 50s. It's the Communist Party of Italy in 60s and 70s. That is Marxist-Leninism. But my generation, and younger than me, we have not lived during Soviet Union. We don't have any nostalgia, or we don't have any friends that we grew up with and had these thoughts together. And I don't have a lot of friends that I sit and talk to, like about these things and how it was in DDR or something. So we can see this with no feelings, right? We can analyze DDR and the People's Republics of Hungary and all these things. We can see that from an outside perspective, and I think that's hopeful for the future. Kind of, yeah. So it was not. We didn't have to deal with it in that way.
All right. So just first to make sure I understood what you had said earlier, I think to summarize, you said it was necessary for the Communist Party to maintain basically like a hard line and not be drawn into coalitions with sort of opportunist anti-NATO groups. Just curious, like what does that mean concretely? Does it mean, you know, writing very clear theory? Does it mean, I don't know, forming independent alternative organizations or services that might draw in someone who is suddenly concerned about joining NATO? Like concretely, what does that mean for Sweden, and what would you think this sort of hardline strategy would mean in general for communist movements?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask what your general approach is to mass organization. If you are working currently in the unions, how it works, if it's still like, if communists allowed now, if they are discriminated against, yeah, and like, I think it might be like a tough sell currently to be against NATO. Like, how is the general public thinking about it? Like, how do you approach this position without to be branded like a Russian asset or something Like, how do you deal with the fear?
Yeah, and I would like to know, there are some similarities to Finland, and are you in exchange with Finnish communists about this topic? And do you think it could be possible to organize something together with Finnish comrades, or is it too different? Yeah.
So of course this is the difficult questions. So you can, in theory, everything is easy, right? And in practice, it's much more difficult, of course. So, but the coalition and hard line and stuff, I wouldn't consider it a hard line. Maybe you can say that, but so. When you say it's hard line, it's like it sounds like kind of, you know, the criticism against Lenin of being dogmatic and all these things. So, but we actually, for real, believe it's not for me being like the best theoretician or something like that. It's like we actually believe that people needs to understand. They need to understand what NATO is. They need to understand why Sweden wants to join NATO. Because if they understand that, they can also understand a lot of other things about how capitalism works and also be anti-capitalist. That's the main thing. That's the main issue. So for Sweden, actually, it doesn't change so much, and we cannot change inside. Like to have a belief that we can change Sweden with reforms inside of the capitalist system to go back to a step where it was before, that's haven't happened. Like we know everything about this. Like we can study history, right? That's not how these things happen. So the things happens, to be very clear, like when you put the gun on the head of the capitalist, then they give you reforms, right? It's not because if you ask for reforms, they give you reforms. So that has never happened in the history of capitalism, and there is no reason in theory either that it would happen. So these people that are joining NATO, we need to talk to them. And that's what we're doing. We're arranging demonstrations against NATO, but and everyone is welcome, but not as a party, right? So we don't have different. We don't want to collaborate up in parties. So there's no need for us to be to cooperate with some party that says that yes, Russia is good and this is good. Like you cannot find clarity in this. We need to cooperate with the working class. Needs to cooperate. We need to build anti-capitalist sentiment in the working class and also in other parts of the society, right? So we have different parts of society that needs to feel solidarity with the working class and towards one another. Of course, in a country like Sweden, where it's the capitalism is so developed, we don't have so much other kinds of middle classes or something like that. So we have workers, we have small farmers, but they practically don't exist anymore. It's very, very few. So that's how we need unity. We need unity amongst people, not amongst parties. And then we have a question about mass organization, if we're participating in mass organization, or was it just about the labor movement, union movement? Yes, we have had this question and it's not solved. So we have had the line that we are working inside the trade unions, and we try to receive posts inside. Like for me, for example, I'm a elected union, how do you say, leader in my apartment. So I work there, and they know that I'm a communist, and whenever I can, I pass, like try to pass anti-NATO or whatever. Like they know my stance and so on, and that's what we expect from our members, to be people that other people like wherever you are. It can be in the Hyresgästföreningen. Do you understand when I say that? Higher, it's because I understand so many German words, so maybe you understand some Swedish. So it's when you rental organization, rental people that rent their homes. So you're in rental organization. That's mass organizations inside the. But what we actually want to do is to build our own organizations like this. We haven't that strength, but we have tried, and we have this thinking that this is necessary. So we need to build we have a strategy of social alliances that we need to build up. So I don't know, is that yes. And then you also asked me something about this before, and it's like, is it the right way to work inside the unions, or is it not the right way to work? Do we need to step aside from the unions and work somewhere else? And it's a difficult question. I think Italy was a very, very interesting example when they changed instead of working inside the unions, they took the other unions that the capitalists have worked out inside the factories and took over them and used them. So I think there's no principle in this. It's a question about like what is most functioning. Was it another question? There was another one. Finnish, about Finland. So it's very difficult. That's what we're fighting opportunism. It's with other Nordic parties inside the initiative. So we're in the initiative of Communist and Workers' Parties. And inside of that initiative, we think it's the best parties, but it's also a lot of the worst parties. So we're open with this, and we're not ashamed of talking about this, because we think we need clarity, and we need to bring up the differences to the surface. We don't need unity, false unity. So we need clarity. And inside the Finnish party, so we was the ones that was. So there is two Finnish Communist Party, they call themselves Communist Party. So it's the SKP also, and we're not cooperating with them because it's a Social Democratic Party, and it's the other one party, which I don't remember the acronym for, but maybe you have watched Finnish Bolshevik. Yes, so we have a good relationship with some of them, and we are responsible to bringing them into the initiative. And right after they come into the initiative, so there you have a division between old people and young people mostly. So that's the same in a lot of parties, and we think it is our small contribution that we can do in the fight against opportunism is to try to bring up these contradictions to the surface and try to deal with them and try to with arguments try to convince people and make, if it's necessary, with a split. Like we're not trying to split someone, but if they come, so we always take the part of that split that we think is the best. So of course, yeah.
So a few questions of me. Okay, you said you have 15 big families. Sweden is not a puppet. I agree with you in this point. But the thing every time searching is what about the investments of foreign capitalists, of foreign nations into Sweden? I think it's important to know this, to have the whole picture about independency or not, or what means independency in actioning. Maybe you know something more about that, but then also a thing I'm interested in is the relationship to Russia from Sweden. Did it changed from the Soviet Union to now, or have Sweden were more close to Russia before, or it's what happened in this time, or it was the same? And the third question is maybe a difficult question, but what do you think about our discussion and how relevant it is for an also small communist organization like us in Germany? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a similar question. Maybe I can add it, and then you can answer to both at the same time. So yeah, I mean, we have a plan of building a communist party in Germany, and now we are having all those discussions about imperialism and the war in Ukraine and so on. And so, in your opinion, what's the importance of clarifying the issue of imperialism and war as a precondition of building a communist party? And how to what lengths should we go to achieve unity in those questions?
The first question was about foreign capital export inside of Sweden. So yes, it exists, and we can see a small shift, historical shift that before it was more a little bit more American capital, and now it's a little bit more German capital inside of Sweden, and of course it's also a little bit more Swedish capital inside of Germany. I don't know so much what I can say about that. That's how capitalism works. It doesn't make Sweden independent of Germany, but of course, if we think that for example, is it Slovakia, where Volkswagen has like 60% of the export of, is it Slovakia that Volkswagen has factories in? Of course, they can. They have something to say about politics in Slovakia. Of course, they do. So it's not a difficult question, I think, and it doesn't change the understanding of imperialism either. And the second question was about
relationship to Russia.
Swedish relationship to Russia. So of course, as we know, during the period of, like we're saying, socialism in one country, the tactic to save actually Soviet Union or to strengthen the position of Soviet Union in the world. So the communist parties adapted the position that were like defending Soviet Union. So they were not exactly, but in a kind of way acting as ambassadors for Soviet Union inside inside their countries, and a position which a lot of parties later left and became Euro-communist parties. When Soviet Union was strong and had much to say, it was a very good thing for the unions, of course, because as we said, there were always a seat left over for the ghost of the Soviet Union in the agreements with the capitalists. So that's a fact, of course. So no one could, like the fear of the Soviet Union and the fear of the people in power are very strong, and that's how you make reforms. So you mean maybe the official standpoint of the government towards Soviet? Yeah, I guess it has gotten worse. So, but they use Russia as a tool today for implementing NATO membership and to strengthen the military and take funds from sectors of the economy to the military and police force and these things. So. I mean, it's pretty much the same, but when Soviet Union was at its strongest, the relationship were better.
Maybe into economics, economic relations.
So Sweden is a country that is not dependent on foreign power in that way, like electricity. So Germany is very independent from gas from Russia, but Sweden is not. So we have the lowest prices on power. Like in Europe, it's the lowest prices on power. Even if it has increased, it's still very low compared to the rest of Europe. And it also, of course, makes Sweden more independent in a way, like of foreign policy towards Russia. So it can take a harsher standpoint than, for example, Germany. So it's no doubt that Sweden is on the Ukrainian side. Of course, they have been promised to build up Ukraine and put troops in the Baltic countries and all these things. So it's universal. All parties are pro or against Russia and pro-Ukraine. And the third question you had was about...
what do you mean about the meaning of this discussion, or how many we have to know in maybe communist organizations, more smaller communist organizations like us in Germany? And
Yeah. So what's the importance of clarifying the issues of imperialism and war as a precondition for creating a communist party, and to what lengths communists should go to achieve unity in those questions. Yes.
And maybe also in our situation, because I think we agree also that we are in a big communist party. We have to clarify this at all. But what do we have to do now?
All right. So I don't want to address your organization, but I can speak in general.
Yeah.
So I think that like the question of imperialism is like, of course, it is for us. It's a precondition for having a communist party. Of course, like that's why the Communist International was built from the beginning. So that is communism, actually. It's difficult to be a communist, I think. It's easy to be like the deformed communist party of the 50s and 60s that later became the left party. But of course, it's a precondition. So and to reach unity, like what I think in the end, like if you have, I don't know how to put this, but if you have the knowledge or you have the possibility to get this knowledge, then in the end, you also need to have a character. Like you need to be able to say that imperialist war is a bad thing, right? It's not a good thing that workers is getting killed, right? You can. It's difficult for me to understand how you can have a policy of the Second International and support the one country against another country in an imperialist war. I cannot understand that, and I cannot understand that from a human perspective either. Right, so it's difficult for me to understand that thing, but I know it exists, and it's very good, of course, to have discussions around it. But you cannot have those discussions for like years and years and years, right? So we're not even in that difficult position like when you have a war. It's easier. I have more understanding actually of being in a war and like giving your support to the capitalists of one country, because you're in a tougher position. Like now we're not in that position. Even we're not in that position. And some people take the stand of imperialists. So now it's easier for us to have a theoretical viewpoint. And even now we don't take that stand. So yes, I think it was...
Genau, Diskussion, Fragen, was ihr möchtet. Wir haben noch 10 Minuten.
Okay. I would like to have your opinion on, you explained why the Swedish capital class has an interest in joining NATO and is using the Russian invasion of Ukraine as the justification for that. You also said that Sweden is pretty much independent from foreign capital. Of course, it exists, but it... in the energy sector. Okay, in the energy sector. But my question is, what do you think is Sweden's role in the future of the NATO?
Ihr hattet gerade Wahlen gehabt, Reichstagswahlen. Ja? Ich verstehe das Wahlsystem in Schweden noch nicht. Kannst du ein paar Worte dazu sagen? Es war sehr schwierig für die Partei anzutreten. Ja, und kannst ja ein paar Formalitäten, wie das funktioniert dort in Schweden.
Okay, I will translate it right away. So he's asking about the elections that you had in Sweden. There were parliamentary elections, and he doesn't yet understand fully the Swedish electoral system. So maybe you can maybe explain a little bit about that, because it seems that it was a little hard for the party to run for the elections, and how, yeah, why was that? Why it was so hard?
All right. So the first question, what I see the future of Sweden inside of NATO? Yeah, I see Sweden taking an even more active role in the aggressions in other countries. So even more military, because they will get the funds for the military races. So they get maybe 2 or 3 times more money to the military spendings than before, which was already increasing, but now they can say this is the goal, like the 2% of the GDP. So they will take a more active role. They have already said that they are going to send permanent troops to both countries, and all other wars that are going to come. Maybe we'll see Swedes go in even more than before to these countries with bigger troops and participate in the division of the world more aggressively. And the other question was about the elections in Sweden. So in Sweden, it's a 4%. You need to get inside the parliament. Threshold, yes, and also if it's also a threshold to get funding from the state, funding money. So they give you money to be in the elections. They give you the voting papers. They distribute them to the all electoral. So at every place, 1,000 people is voting. And this is like very many of them, and people, and you need, as a small party, we need to go there and put them, and we have half an hour before they opens. So it's impossible. Like we would need 100,000 people or something to have our papers in place, and we also need to pay for them ourselves. So we need to print them. To pay for printing them in every election that we are in. And also this time we had problems. We couldn't be in the election with our name because they said it was similar to another name. It was the first time that happened. But we also seen due to this Ukrainian situation, we also see a bit more, not repression, but we see also the ability restriction to restrict us and just say that we are like for Putin or something because we're communists. And we see difficulties. We've seen bigger difficulties this time. So we didn't get the permission to be in the elections until very late. And that made us be able to, so we was in with our acronym SKP instead of Swedish Communist Party. And that got allowed, but they pushed that forward, the decision, they pushed it forward. So we got the ability to buy the printing of the papers and be able to distribute it late. So we hadn't the chance to, what we usually do is put them inside leaflets and in forehand go to people and give them to people, and in putting them in mailboxes so they can have the paper and go and vote and stand beforehand. So we get it that very late. And then, of course, it's always a big... so the day of the elections, you put on the dress, the jogging dress, the jogging shoes. You have a driver next to you, and you break all the speed limits. And they stop at one place. You run all fast you can. You put the papers. And then you run back, and then you go to the next place, and you have to 1 week before making Google Maps, you have to make the shortest distances and all these things. So it's a real, it's good for your stamina. It's yeah. So, but of course it's designed for small parties not being able to participate fully in the democracy. Of course, yeah.
Okay, wir haben immer noch 10 Minuten. Möchtet ihr noch irgendwas sagen? 5? Ja, okay.
Okay, I have to translate it, I think. Yeah, so I will try. Yeah, what you said is that that your input was very exciting and very interesting, because especially what you said about the demonstrations against NATO and this non-alignment movement in Sweden, because and this has become clearer to her during the last weeks or months, because yeah, she said she was on a membership assembly of the left party, this Die Linke in Germany. And at first they were giving speeches against the sanctions and the confrontational policies of Germany against Russia and so on. But then they were invited by an activist to some kind of preparatory meeting in order to organize a peace demonstration. And on this meeting there was this idea that if we reject the sanctions against Russia, and the war policies, and if we open Nord Stream 2 and so on, we will kind of go back to the old capitalism, and the crisis will be over and everything will be fine. And yeah, this is of course she says this is a mistaken view, of course. And in Germany, the German Communist Party also promotes similar ideas within the peace movement, some sort of economic nationalism, and so yeah, we have to promote and we have to strengthen the position of Germany, because this is harmful for Germany. So we should end the conflict with Russia and so on. And they are, for example, demonstrating together with people that hold Russian flags or German flags, and no red flags at all on those demonstrations. And she said it's a very dangerous position, because it's possible that in the future German capitalism could turn away from the USA and the alignment with the USA and the transatlantic partnership and so on. So this could even become useful for the German bourgeoisie to approach Russian or Chinese imperialism again. So yeah, I hope I got the essence of what you said. And so she wanted to say that we can transfer a lot of what you said about Sweden. We can transfer it to the situation here in Germany and draw a lot from that. And for a criticism of some opportunist tendencies in the German movement.
Last words from
yes,
you.
I just want to make one final remark. About what you said, like of course we know that imperialist alliances are temporary. Even if they are for 100 years, they are temporary in the grand scheme of things, right? We don't know which turns exactly the capital will take and what needs they will have. So it is you have a point there. We know, like Brexit, for example. They left one imperialist alliance to benefit, of course, the export-oriented capital of Great Britain. That was not. They could not compete with Germany in the same with the same rules, right? So that's a good point. And also we need to know that we are accountable for what we say, right? And we're accountable towards the people. And if we say something to the people, we tell them lies together with anti-vaccine organizations and whatever you have out there, because they are saying they're against NATO. We are with them, right? So we're accountable for what we're saying and for what we're doing, of course. And what do we need to get out of this anti-NATO demonstration? We need people to understand what imperialism is, right? And be fighting against it. And also, of course, propose the other kind of production system, which is socialism. So yes, we need to think about that. And also, I want final remarks. You said something about being a small party or a big party and these things. It doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you're a small party. It doesn't matter if you're a big party. If you don't have if you're not a communist party, you're nothing. Even if you have 100,000 members. It doesn't mean anything, right? So we cannot say a party is good or big or something. It's big, not in numbers, right? It's in organizational strength and what you can achieve. That's how we measure how big, how good, how strong a Communist Party is by organization, position, clear position, fighting for the working class interest, and how they are able to do that. It can be one person that is more worth than 500 persons, right? Of course. And the way this person organizes with other 5 persons might be very good and very effective, right? And can achieve very big things. So we also see in countries that went through revolutions that they were very few in one moment, and then they were many in next week. No, next week, but you understand what I mean. So it doesn't matter. It's the same for all parties.